Hello everybody, and welcome to a resonance review. Today we are covering the Catchear CE6T, which is the very first IEM made by a new brand, Catchear. It is a tribrid IEM featuring per side. It's going to have two dynamic drivers, three balanced armature drivers, and a dynamic driver for a total of 6 drivers per side. Again, this is a tribrid configuration. So let's get into the technical specifications. So as I mentioned, there are two 7.5 millimeter dynamic drivers per side. There's a 12 millimeter bone conduction driver, and there are 3 balanced armature drivers. I don't know specifically which ones there are, but there's 3 BAs per side. It has detachable cables featuring the 2-pin 0.78 millimeter standard. It has an impedance of 13 ohms, a sensitivity of 106 decibels of SPL per milliwatt, and it has a frequency response as listed by Catchear of 10 hertz to 30 kilohertz. It also has 2 dip switches per side for a total of 4 different tuning modes. And if you know anything about me, you know how much I don't like tuning modes. But we are going to actually give Catchear's implementation of crossover tuning or crossover switches a fair shake. So let's get into the overview. So as I mentioned, there are 4 distinct sound profiles, but for the majority of the review, I'm just going to be talking about the standard tuning, which is the tuning that you receive the IM with. I will give you a little bit more detail about the specifics of each mode a little later. So to start out, broad strokes, let's talk about the standard mode and how it sounds. So the CE6T, broadly speaking, is a V-shaped IM. It has an emphasized mid-bass and sub-bass, and it has an emphasized treble. And something that makes the Catchear stand out from some of its peers is that it does not really have a recessed mid-range, but it actually does have a pretty almost shelf-like emphasis in the upper mid-range that adds a lot of extra energy and communicativeness, if that's even a word, to instrumentation and vocals. They're very forward. In terms of the treble, it is very well extended, it's articulate, and it is smooth. So there's not really any jitter or disjointedness in the treble, which is nice considering this is a tribrid IM, and it's free from sibilance and sharpness, which is also very nice, especially if you're treble sensitive like myself. It's particularly good at layering, and something that it does very well is produce a good amount of separation and detail and texture without sounding grainy or gritty, which is something that you can sometimes find with earphones that are really bright or are very high strung in the treble. So that is very nice. In terms of mid-range, some people looked at the frequency response graph produced by Catchear before this was sold and said, you know what, this is, it's kind of a weird tuning. It's dead on arrival, blah, 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 blah. Actually, it's not that weird. It's just a V-shaped sound signature with an emphasized upper mid-range. It's not quite W-shaped, where you have, a good amount of emphasis that is almost dominant in the mid-range, but it's definitely more than your average V-shaped IM. That said, this is going to sound a little weird if you're switching back and forth from maybe flat mid-ranges or very recessed mid-ranges to this one. Because the extra emphasis in the upper mid-range is really going to require a little bit of brain burn-in when you're listening to it. And that's something that I had to do, but it really didn't take very long. It took me about 15 minutes, so didn't mind at all. But the extra emphasis in the mid-range adds quite a bit of detail and texture to it, where sometimes you might find some of those finer, minutia of instrumentation and vocals get buried in the mix in maybe a recessed mid-range or a flat mid-range. The CE6T surfaces a lot of those much more easily than some of its peers, and it does so to great effect. It's a very smooth mid-range, and it's not particularly cold either. The way that it's meshes with the lower mid-range and the treble is very interesting, and the lower mid-range itself actually blends very nicely with the bass. Moving on to bass. So the CE6T features two dynamic drivers, 7.5 millimeters each, and a bone conduction driver. And to me that implies that the CE6T has, at the very least, a very emphasized bass and a competent bass. And it does have an emphasized bass, but it's not very emphasized. It's definitely more than you would find on, let's say, like a reference styled earphone, but it's not a straight up bass head earphone. So even when you take into account the fact that it has all these drivers that on paper look like they're going to add to emphasis and the bass head behaviors, it didn't actually end up working out that way. So the bass is, it's pleasantly tuned, it's plentiful in terms of articulation and tone, and it adds a nice set of undertones of richness to tracks. So when you're listening to rock, you have a pretty healthy, weighty response when you hit the drums. You have nice, undercurrents of weight and substance on the plucking of a bass guitar. When you're listening to electronic music, you do get a reasonable amount of punch and some rumble. I do wish that the CE6T had a harder and more controlled mid-bass punch and a more intense and formed sub-bass rumble. It's not all the way there. It is close, but I do wish that it had improvements in that area, especially considering the nature of its tuning. It feels like it's 9/10 of the way there, but that 1/10 that's missing is notable, especially when you take into account the fact this is not exactly a budget earphone. So something to keep in mind. In terms of build, so the CE6T is all resin. Everything from the faceplates to the nozzles, it's all resin. I'm not a big fan of all resin IEMs, but considering the CE6T, especially when you take it to the early bird discount, it's not super expensive. That said, I do think it should have metal nozzles, especially when you look at the fine, sculpting on the nozzle. You can see that there's 3 exits, and one of them actually has a sound damper in it for tuning purposes. I think that longevity-wise, a metal nozzle would have done wonders here. There's no cracks on mine, obviously. I haven't had it for very long, and nobody's had a CE6T for very long, and only time will really tell on this. But it's a pretty common thing, especially when you look at the history of resin IEMs. If you go all the way back down to like 2016, 2015, when Chi-Fi was coming really big, resin IEMs had a variety of problems, whether it was cracking by the MMCX connectors or the 2-pin connectors, cracking on the nozzle. There was all sorts of things. So there's nothing specific that's making me worried about this particular IEM for resin, but generally speaking, I do prefer metal nozzles. I would also like to see the CE6T's nozzle have a mesh, preferably a hydrophobic coated debris filter in front of the nozzles. Right now, stuff can just go in there or come into contact with the tuning damper, the acoustic damper that's in the nozzle. That's not good. It's very difficult to clean if stuff gets on the damper itself. There's not really any good way of getting inside the IEM either because of the shapes of the nozzle and the stem and whatnot. So again, I'd like to see a debris filter in there, preferably a hydrophobic coated one, so that earwax or sweat or whatever doesn't get inside it. Other than that, the 2-pin connectors on the top of the shell, they look like they're sculpted reasonably well. I don't see any issues with it. The dip switches on the back are set pretty well. They're not loose or anything, so it looks like those were seated nicely. One thing, again, if you're going to implement tuning, I understand that dip switches are kind of an industry standard. A lot of brands use them. I'm not a big fan of them just because they break all the time. And I don't think that these are particularly cheap dip switches or are prone out of the ordinary to breaking, but they're still dip switches and they still probably will eventually break, and that's just a darn shame. By the way, there is no tuning pick in there, so if you're going to use something, just use a wooden toothpick or like a very thin piece of plastic, Don't use metal because you'll chunk it probably. Not a good idea. Just use a toothpick if you have one. In terms of the cable, so the cable is, it's a braided cable. It's got a clear outer layer. It's got, that copper wire underneath. The termination is 3.5 millimeter or 4.4 millimeter balance, depending on what you've ordered. I have 3.5 on mine, and it's it's finished reasonably well. It's a pretty standard cable. It has, it's not fully free from body, but it's mostly free from body. It's reasonably ergonomic. It's fine. For its actual shelf price, MSRP of $360, you could do better, for sure. For the early bird, which is $180, this is fine. All right, now moving on to power. So the CE6T has a low impedance of 13 ohms. That's pretty easy to drive. I was able to drive it off of everything at appropriate volumes, but I did actually notice that there were certain sources that had, maybe a little bit better bass response. I haven't been able to measure it, so I don't know for sure, but I actually think that I have, a perceivable improvement in bass based on using the Meze dongle or my Hi-Fi Man Super Mini as a source. Take that how you will. Warranty and repair. So the CE6T has an 18-month warranty, which is about 50% longer than your normal warranty that you get from a Chi-Fi IM, which is nice. And Catchear says that they're in the process of formalizing the RMA and warranty process, so I would check in with them if you want to know any of the specifics on that. Now for accessories. Inside the box, you're going to get 6 pairs of silicone ear tips. You're going to get 1 magnetic clasp carrying case and the 0.78 millimeter 2-pin cable. So, that's a pretty sparse accessory package for a $360 earphone, which is the MSRP for here. It's not so bad for $180, but either way, I do think that Catchear should at the very least throw in a tuning pick for the dip switches, a plastic one, so that people don't break it by using stupid stuff like, paper clips or earring backs or thumbtacks. There needs to be preferably also a cleaning tool for the IM, especially since you don't have a mesh. You should probably include a cleaning tool. You need to have foam ear tips. Again, it's for $360, 6 pairs of ear tips, silicone ones. Even though they're not bad, it's not really enough. So I strongly suggest that you add to the accessory package, you fill it out, make it a little bit more robust. I know it's your first earphone, it's your first IM, I get it. Please do improve and iterate on this accessory package. Now, I did mention that there is a magnetic clasp carrying case. This one I have mixed feelings on. On the one hand, it's decent. It does a good job of protecting from, debris intrusion, dust, water, sweat, anything like that. It's decent. It does an okay job at protecting from crushing forces. So if you were to throw that into a backpack or a purse, it would be reasonably well protected. And it's not so big that the IM is going to be crashing around inside of it and get hurt by banging into itself. So it's another plus. On the flip side, it's very, very light, and the magnetic clasp, while technically an affirmative locking mechanism, could still conceivably get knocked open somehow, and then the earphones fall out. I would like to see a slightly sturdier case, perhaps one with an actual affirmative locking mechanism, maybe like a button or a zipper or something. So that's my thoughts on that. Now for comparisons, for these comparisons, I compared the Rose Cappuccino Mark II, the Campfire Audio Cascara, and the Rose QTX in my full-length written review, which you can find on resonancereviews.com. I have much more detail on there for everything. This was really more of an overview about my thoughts about the CE6T. So if you want to look at those comparisons, I highly recommend that you do so over there. I mentioned that there are tuning modes for the CE6T. There are 3 that I haven't talked about. And again, if you are really interested in the majority of detail and you want a more thorough explanation, please go read full-length written review at resonancereviews.com. I'll give you a quick overview on the other tuning modes. So I covered standard already. Bass mode, it's exactly what it sounds like. It adds a lot of bass, but in this case, it adds bass and it also adds a lot of lower mid-range emphasis. I'm not a big fan of this. It makes it sound thicker and it doesn't add any shape or punch or rumble to it. It just kind of makes the sound signature a lot warmer. Some people will like this. I didn't like it very much. Treble mode is just that, it's treble, it adds more treble and it kind of makes the sound signature a little bit brighter and a little bit less emphasized on the upper mid-range, which for people who are looking for more traditional V-shaped tuning, that's going to work nicely for you. And for enhanced mode, which is the final mode, it's essentially just more V-shaped. So you're gonna get more bass and you're gonna get more treble, and you're gonna end up with a much more emphasized bass, much more emphasized treble, with a recessed mid-range that ends up becoming a little bit warmer. So if you like, traditional V-shaped tuning and you're looking for a warm mid-range instead of the upper mid-range emphasized tuning that the standard mode has, then enhanced mode will sound pretty good to you. So moving on to the conclusion. So the CE6T is a solid offering from a completely new brand. It's their first IM that they've ever made. It sounds good. I do like the way it sounds. I have my nitpicks, right? I think that it needs to have a more robust accessory package. I think that there are tweaks to the build that would help make it the CE6T last longer or be more tolerant for owners who are less than perfect at storing, using, and maintaining their earphones. And I have some thoughts on spots here and there where the different tuning modes could be improved. That said, I think that if you are looking for a tunable tribrid earphone, especially one that uses a fairly interesting driver configuration, this is an earphone that you might enjoy. So specifically, who do I think this is going to be for? This is for listeners who are looking for a rich, smooth, and flexible sound profile, and that's in reference to the standard tuning. It's audiophiles who like to tinker with their IEMs. The different tuning modes might actually appeal to you with the customization aspect. Listeners who want bass and mid-range presence, so you're going to get both from the standard tuning. Those who are comfortable with the quirks associated with smaller and newer companies like Catchear, and those who want bone conduction driver input without some of the usual bone conduction driver shenanigans. So it's a subtle and very refined implementation of bone conduction. Now, who this is not for risk-averse buyers. As with every single brand new brand, you don't know how long they're going to stick around for. And even then, there are, again, quirks associated with starting a business, particularly around support and things like that, that you might not want to deal with. If you want a neutral sound signature, this is not for you, not at all. Bass heads, you're going to probably end up coming to the same conclusion I did, that there's either not enough bass or that the bass isn't punchy or rumbly enough. And those who want a traditional V-shaped sound signature, yes, it does have a tuning mode that can get you to more V-shaped, but it's still not going to sound like a traditionally V-shaped earphone like the Campfire Audio Cascara, which is an earphone I did do a full comparison on in the written review. So with that, I would like to thank you for watching a Resonance review, and we really appreciate your time here. If you have any thoughts or comments, or you want to flame me for my production quality or whatever it is, go ahead and leave that in the comments down below. And if you think that I have earned it, please do give us a like and a subscribe. It really means a lot to me. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and as always, happy listening.